EGORAVEN, Legend of the Silk Rose. Created and written by Daphne Lage. Narrated by Daphne Lage. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved. The forest awoke from its slumber, glowing with the radiance of the first morning light. Crystalline dew clung to fragile leaves as a breeze broke the stillness with its swaying whisper. The ancient woods sat in quiet majesty, shrouded in a translucent mist that brushed the ground with its softness. The ebony ghost made his way through the tranquil grove. Grass parted as each cloven hoof came down, shrubs pulling away so as not to mar the silken coat. The mist swirled around his legs, climbing up about him in vain to hide the glimmering ivory horn. The mist swirled around his legs, climbing up about him in vain to hide the glimmering ivory horn that rose from his brow like a delicate crown. The black unicorn continued his slow pace, the soft crunch of greenery contradicting his large, powerful frame. Warm rays broke through the canopy above, creating a glowing lace pattern beneath him. The mist finally gave way, dissolving in the light as timid birdsong began to echo. Alaric raised his narrow muzzle, feeling the wind brush through his long mane. Even though the woodland was always his to lay claim if he wanted, Edenron was where the unicorn came from. Legend had it that it was home to pools of ancient magic, remnants of the great war between the first unicorn and the first dragon. Whether the legend was true was uncertain. All Alaric knew was that the valley pulled at his very being, making it easy to feel comfort in such a place. As with all things, a price was to be had for such a sanctuary, that truth reminding him of why he ventured so far. A clumsy rustling snapped the creature out of his reflection, his graceful head turning. At first, Alaric was ready to dismiss the noise as some groggy, blundering animal, but the faint voice proved otherwise. His narrow ears perked up, pointing forward, his muscles tensing. The last thing he wanted was to come across a hunter. Unicorns may be immortal, but they are not immune to a violent death. Despite the threat that heralded the sound, Alaric took a few steps forward, his base equine curiosity overtaking higher reason. Alaric stopped. The rustling started again, the voice louder. "This can't be a hunter," he spoke to himself, not raising his voice louder than a whisper. "No hunter makes that much noise if he plans to catch anything." His sharp ears swiveled as they searched, studying the sounds as he took a deep breath for clues. As the scent entered his sensitive nostrils, his eyes dilated with intrigue. It was human, but not that of a rugged hunter or farmer. It was an optimistic, youthful fragrance, still teeming with hope. The unicorn lost his care as he drank in more, filled with a need to discover whom the sweet smell belonged to. "I can't believe Gunther has me doing this again," Desmond grumbled as he pulled away rotting tree trunks to reveal their tiny white cache. "How many mushrooms could that old man need?" He fell to his knees with a frustrated groan, scooping up the chalky fungus with his hands. Dumping them into a waiting basket, he slapped the dirt off with a loud clap. Sighing, he reached into his blue robes, pulling out a yellowed paper. The list made Desmond wrinkle his nose. "Mushrooms, herbs, tubers. I already have to do the gardening when I get back. This list is going to keep me searching for things all morning." He folded the crackling paper, placing it back into his pocket. "Why can't Gunther just buy these things in town instead of having me look for it every other day?" Still fussing, he reached over, scooping up the last mushrooms, ready but unwilling to go on to the next item on the roster. The black unicorn came closer, keeping himself hidden. He smiled at the disappointment displayed at morning chores, finding humor in how conflict could be found in the simplest of things. Alaric admired the boy's charm and his simple yet striking countenance. Sunlight shone on the long strands of brown hair he brushed from his face with a pale hand. At that moment, the unicorn understood why humans so bewitched the elves of the valley. Desmond continued with his task, collecting the needed items with as much care as he could muster. With every ingredient, he fought the urge to head back to the cottage where his studies awaited him along with more work. He didn't dare try his teacher's patience. He was frustrated enough with his curriculum without having punishments heaped on top of them. He kneeled again, begrudging the soil grinding into his favorite pants. As he dug into the soft earth, the hair on the back of his head began to stand. A tingling, like static, ran through him, making him shudder. Desmond stopped, unnerved by the feeling. He held his breath as a large shadow started coming up beside him. "Desmond!" Birds took flight at the voice's petulant sound. Startled, Desmond turned with a quick jerk, almost tipping over the basket. The brush behind him crackled. "That's weird." He paused, looking around. "I could have sworn there was something behind me. Something big." Disturbed, Desmond shuddered again, trying to rid himself of the sensation. "Desmond! Can you hear me or what?" the second voice yelled. The young human looked up with a more exasperated expression, but this time he felt relief knowing he wasn't alone. "I need you back at the house. There are other errands and the list can wait." "But you just sent me out to get you these things. I'm almost done." "Like I said, they can wait." Wiping off his clothes, Desmond shook his head. I wish he would make up his mind. He picked up the basket, giving his robes one last shake. He rubbed at his stained knees, no amount of slapping making them fade. "Oh, great," he mumbled. Just one more thing to add to his growing list of annoyances. His skin tightened, turning cold. Goosebumps broke out on every inch of his flesh. The tingling returned, just not as intense as before. Desmond spied over his shoulder, not seeing or hearing anything suspicious. The gruff, disembodied voice called, "I'm not going to wait all day." The growing agitation was becoming more apparent. Not wanting to hear his name screamed again, but drawn into finding the source of the strange sensation, Desmond returned home with deep reluctance. Desmond, Alaric mouthed to himself as he watched the boy leave. I'm sure such a modest name will be the first thing the elves will decide to change. The unicorn thought over what he had just witnessed. Very curious. Why didn't the magic do what it was supposed to? Any other would have been enchanted, making luring them away simple. I've never had the opposite happen before. Alaric paused, sorting his thoughts. This one did feel something, I'm sure of, but not enough to be potent. The intrusion of the other didn't help either. He faced the direction Desmond disappeared in. This pretty prey will require a little more effort. The elves will have to wait. Letting out a satisfied snort, the ebony ghost nodded as he vanished into the brush and back into the deep woods. Desmond found it difficult to focus on the old mystical tome. The frail yellowed pages threatened to crumble at his every touch. The faded writing blurred as he struggled to translate the dialect, making him realize collecting mushrooms wasn't as much of a chore as he first thought. At least he was outside. Time and again he looked out the narrow, arched window past the neat, overflowing garden. The clear, sunny day attracted his attention with welcoming blue skies and wispy clouds. It was a much better alternative to being locked in a dark house studying ancient spells. A sorcerer's apprentice was a mundane existence at best, despite the prestigious reputation guaranteed from success at his studies. If he wasn't practicing simplistic and practical spells, his responsibilities included various errands around the house. From cleaning the cluttered cabin to tending the garden, Desmond's days could not be mistaken for unique. Today, his restlessness was beginning to get the better of him. The chair creaked and scraped the floor as he pushed it away from the angled lectern displaying the tattered book. With a loud yawn, he stretched, his aching body fighting every move. Eyeing the thicker, later half of the book, Desmond yearned to try more advanced incantations, longing to feel more like a student than a caretaker. Rubbing his eyes, he went to the front door, adjusting to the changing light as it opened. A refreshing breeze met him, making the sole choice to step outside. He stared at the untamed front yard, relieved that Gunther had never asked him to clear it, save for a narrow, worn pathway. He sat on the topmost cobble step and lounged backward, basking in the afternoon sun. Gunther had gone into town and wouldn't be back until dusk, giving Desmond a rare several hours by himself. It was not to do what he pleased, though. The old sorcerer expected his young charge to always study in hopes of honing the magical talent that insisted on remaining dormant within him. That fact bothered Desmond the most when he met with friends who went off with other teachers. They would master advanced magic while he struggled with carnival tricks. Desmond felt his mind drifting. As he began to doze off, he snapped up, remembering. I wonder if she came back yet. He spoke to empty air, standing up to head back into the house. Ignoring the books that demanded his attention, he strolled towards the garden, continuing to the forest that was such a bane a few hours before. Desmond was a carpenter's son, and it was always believed he would also grow up to be a carpenter. He studied the tools of the trade under his father, but something within him stirred for a different path. Desmond didn't remember when the interest started. Even though he had not manifested any magical talent, he knew deep down he wanted to be a sorcerer. His parents didn't understand the unusual request. Talented children started very young and were sent to appropriate schools soon after. But a carpenter's son? Desmond was determined. He practiced carpentry and continued helping around the farm as he was supposed to, but every moment of spare time was used studying magic. Magic did whatever it wanted and appeared in its own time, and Desmond was sure that with enough application, his own would come soon enough. The first time he was sure he was on the right track was when he met Gunther, a freelance wizard teaching at a nearby school to supplement his studies. He at once took an interest in the boy. They spent most of the day talking, and Gunther asked if he would be interested in apprenticing with him. Desmond could not have been more excited. Here was the proof that he wasn't just going through a phase. A real sorcerer had pointed out that there was indeed latent magic in him. For some reason, it was not presenting itself as it had with more adept students. Soon after, Desmond's parents were convinced to allow him to train their son. It had been 2 years. With Gunther's guidance, his magic began to flow, slow and weak, but better than nothing. Living as an apprentice, however, was not what he envisioned. Everything was hard. The studying, the work, the chores, everything. His teacher had warned him that it would be from the very beginning of his training. Desmond was resolved to see it through, although it was days like today that made him wonder whether he had made the right choice. This time, Desmond walked through the dense vegetation, not begrudging his need to be there. Gunther had sent him on so many treks for his various errands that he became familiar with the surroundings, unlike in the beginning when getting lost was a common annoyance. He could now walk through the forest in the pitch of night and still find his way. Maybe his magic was more of a practical nature than what he had hoped. An unusual rustling caught his attention. Desmond kept a careful ear out. It can't be wolves. It's daylight. So it must be wind blowing through the trees. The rustling began again, accompanied by an even more familiar feeling. Goosebumps waved all over his body. The sharp tingling from that moment returned. Desmond picked up his pace, attempting to see if he could glimpse what he was sharing his walk with. Something had to be causing the inexplicable sensation, although he wasn't sure if he wanted to find out. Nothing else was out of the ordinary. No birds were taking to flight, screaming a warning call, or small animals scurrying away from a particular area. The forest was as typical and calm as he was used to. The sound came again. Wind. It's wind. Desmond repeated the words, trying to regain the conviction of his first realization. Just as it had started, the feeling stopped. Speeding to a trot, Desmond reached his desired destination as the trees faded into a clearing. A brook lay ahead, clear water running over shiny, smooth stones. The sight made him forget the strange incident. "Too bad it's not hot enough," he said, taking in the sight before him. "That water looks good enough to jump in. Guess I'll just settle with getting my feet wet." Desmond positioned himself on a sturdy rock, removing his boots and rolling his pants. He kicked both legs, splashing the refreshing water, looking over at the home across the river from him. Stacked stones made the walls of the quaint cottage, its roof topped with a thick layer of thatch. A grassy clearing surrounded it, an incomplete wall separating the house from the rest of the imposing forest. No one was around, as he could see, but it was obvious that chores were being worked on. A large basket of wet laundry sat beside two poles holding a taut line. Sheets billowed stiff with water, the ropes sagging where they hung, but the poles remained firm. Desmond kicked the water again, glancing at an animal walking opposite his direction, a slight turn revealing an ebony horse following the riverbank's edge. Remembering the rustling, he felt a feeling of foolishness over finding out he had gotten nervous over escaped livestock. While watching the animal, Desmond returned his wet feet to his leather boots. If someone had lost a horse, it would be best to catch and return it. Maybe he could even get a reward for his trouble. He stood still as he decided on a course of action. The horse didn't look like it was in a rush, although there wasn't a harness for him to grab onto. With any luck, it would be tame enough for him to lead back home. Desmond followed the horse's slow pace, realizing how the creature acted. It walked as if it were half its size and weight, not the typical plodding. Its coat remained a rich, deep black instead of shining brown in the sunlight. It didn't even make a sound as Desmond could hear his footsteps crush grass and snap twigs underneath him. He studied the black figure as it continued along the river edge, its swishing tail catching his focus. It can't be. Desmond gave the surrounding area a nervous glance. Slim, lion-like tail? No horse has a tail like that. Not believing what it signified, Desmond stepped back. "Turn around," he whispered, clenching his fists. "You can't be what I think you are. Turn around and show me." Obliging him, the creature arched its deer-like neck, revealing an elegant profile, and growing from the center of its forehead was a single spiral horn. The tingling started, this time with such intensity that Desmond was knocked back, his eyes blinded with white stars. Like a flame, an uncontrollable urge to follow rose in his chest. Fighting the impulse, Desmond staggered, struggling to regain his sight. The feeling dissipated along with the tingling. The battle was won for now. The animal pawed a cloven hoof, tearing at the grass. The movement betrayed a hint of frustration. "Desmond, is that you?" The words coming from across the river broke the spell. Startled, Desmond turned behind him, seeing a young woman waving from the bank. He spun back, expecting the unicorn to be there. It had retreated into the woods, not making a sound as it had appeared. "Did you see that?" Desmond pointed to the place where the unicorn used to be. "See what?" "The unicorn! It was right here!" His voice trailed as he searched around. "A what?" She either didn't know or didn't hear what he was talking about. Shaking his head, he walked back to where he had been sitting. "Maybe I was just seeing things, but I know I wasn't," he muttered. The girl's lack of reaction made him question his senses. It was too real to be a figment of my imagination. "Aren't you supposed to be studying? I thought old Gunther didn't let you leave the house this far." Her voice brightened his mood. "It feels that way," Desmond answered, dismissing the unicorn. "He went into town, and I decided I needed a much-deserved break." He sat back down and smiled at the girl, unsure if she could see him doing so. Removing his damp shoes, he placed his feet back into the cool water, disappointed at being unable to get a reward for returning a lost horse. "Well, unlike you, I must return to my work. A girl gets no breaks around here." She hoisted up her basket of laundry. Desmond cupped his hands around his mouth. "I'll supervise!" She laughed and waved him off, returning to the clothing. He sighed, splashing the water, trying not to get caught staring. Hannah was the same age as him, a slender young woman with fire-red hair. She wore a plain dress with the hem tied up, showing her bare feet. Thanks to all the work the sorcerer demanded of his young charge, Desmond had to resort to learning Hannah's chore schedule and making sure he was at the river every chance he got when she did them. He could see her without being too far from the house to get into trouble when Gunther called. He felt himself blush, causing him to wiggle his toes. He leaned back on his elbows, looking to where the unicorn stood. How could Hannah just miss seeing a unicorn? And if I wasn't seeing things, what was it doing this close to people anyway? He was more bothered by the latter question than the former. Although unicorns are not rare, they are also not common. They made their homes as far away from people as they could. There are stories of unicorns coming to the aid of kings and living under their care, but those stories were repeated less than the rumors of unicorns stealing maidens away. Whichever was true, Desmond couldn't get his mind off the incident. He tilted his head back and closed his eyes, letting himself slip into a welcome nap. Hannah chuckled as she watched Desmond fall asleep with his feet in the water. "He does that every time," she said to the blanket, continuing her work. "If he is not careful, he'll end up in the river." A mischievous smile crossed her lips. "I hope I'm there to see it if he does." She continued to spy on him from behind the hanging laundry. She remembered first meeting Gunther's student. They had come to purchase dried herbs from her mother. He was quiet and didn't make eye contact. When he did, though, he couldn't help but let loose a modest smile that would grow wider whenever Hannah entered the room. She swayed her head and let out a little laugh as she put up the last of the laundry. Taking one last look at the sleeping apprentice, she picked up the basket and returned to the house. Helping her mother with dinner was the next of her chores, which didn't need to be done just yet. Hannah decided a quiet stroll would be an excellent way to pass the time. Glancing over to where Desmond had been sleeping, she was greeted with an empty stone. He was gone. Gunther expects him to do so much work. Hannah wiped her hands on her shirt, disappointed. But if he is to become a sorcerer, he will no doubt do much more later than he's doing now. I'm glad my life is simpler. She paused. Okay, maybe not as exciting, but simpler, most certain. Being barefoot, she walked along the grassy edge, avoiding the rock bed. She did not want to risk a careless slip that would send her into the water. She chuckled again. "I'm sure Desmond would like to see that," she said, remembering her similar thought. The sound of his name made a smile appear. His vision was enough to keep her company, if she couldn't have him with her. "I wish he wasn't working all the time," she sighed, not hiding her longing. Hannah started humming and twirling, dancing to the music in her mind. She spun until dizziness sent her tumbling onto the ground. She continued to hum, digging her toes into the grass. A shadow stretched beside her as she tilted her head side to side to the melody she imagined. "Desmond?" Hannah hoped to see his familiar figure walk out and surprise her. She called out his name again. As with the first time, no answer followed. Instead, a slight rustling revealed a silhouette among the trees. Alarmed, all she could think about was her mother's warnings about going out too far alone. Between natural predators and travelers with less than chivalrous ideals, there was no telling what could be lurking around. Hannah lifted herself, trying not to frighten or gain the attention of what may be watching her. The shadow jumped to her opposite side. Following, she spun herself around, ready to run at the first sign of anything coming out from its hiding spot. The quick turn dug her heel into the ground, catching her foot. She fell forward onto her hands, panic waving through her. A gasp escaped as Hannah raised her head as a black unicorn emerged from the brush. Her eyes were fixated on the ebony creature with the deep blue eyes. The ivory horn shone with a faint golden light, the silken black coat rippling like liquid. The unicorn began to step back where it came, content at the maiden's notice. Hannah felt confusion overwhelm her. It was always dangerous to confront a wild, magical creature, but the girl could not allow a unicorn to pass her by. "Don't go! Please don't go!" She stretched out her arm, her eyes filled with desperate pleading. The unicorn stopped and faced her. Hannah inched closer, feeling a tremendous pull. No matter what happened, she needed to touch the unicorn. She needed to prove that this wasn't a wonderful dream she was about to awaken from. "Please, I've never met one of your kind before. I know I'll never again." The unicorn stepped lightly, stretching towards her. Placing his velvet muzzle within her hands, he pushed until her head was resting against his cheek. Hannah trembled with overwhelming emotion. She hugged the unicorn's neck, breathing in the perfumed coat. Gathering enough strength, she pulled away, still convincing herself the encounter was real. "I am Alaric," the unicorn spoke. Hannah fell back onto her knees. "What is your name?" "My name is Hannah." "Hannah, I make one request from you. Return to this place tomorrow as the sun begins to set. I will be here waiting. Will you do that for me?" She shivered at the sound of his voice. "Yes, I promise," Hannah answered without hesitation. Alaric bowed before her. With a fluid motion, he turned from the young woman kneeling in the grass, trotting off. Hannah sat motionless, staring into the area where the unicorn stood. As the sky began to turn dark orange with the setting sun, she snapped out of her daze. Realizing she was late for dinner, she jumped up, heading back home. "I can't tell anyone," she thought as she ran. "I made a promise, no matter how I want to tell everyone." Her encounter with the black unicorn would have to remain a secret, for now. Desmond found himself just as distracted despite the outing. As he tried to concentrate on the book before him, Gunther categorized new acquisitions, ignoring him. Desmond stared at the page, the words turning into meaningless scribble. He rested his head on his hand. "Transformation spell, beginner stage," it read. Beginner. Desmond felt betrayed by the word. Scanning the page, he let out a hushed sigh. How can I still be a beginner with all the studying I do? He tried to keep his frustration hidden. I should be accomplishing more. His eyes caught the tome's thicker half, furrowing his brow. The words of his mentor began to repeat in his mind, words that offered no comfort, however true they were. Some magic is buried so deep within a person that it takes much more time and work to manifest, and when it does, it always proves to be much more powerful. Desmond wished he had more faith in himself. He scanned the page again, finding it challenging to continue translating the script. Turning towards the window, his vision glazed over, locking on nothingness. A sharp sting on the back of his neck woke him from his blankness. His teacher was not as occupied as he thought. Ouch! Desmond hissed. How dare you sleep when you should be studying? The elder wizard shouted, irritated. I was not sleeping, Desmond snapped back with guilt in his voice as he tried to rub the burning pain away. You weren't studying regardless. Gunther returned the switch to the shelf. Striding over, he pointed to the page in front of Desmond, his wrinkled hand letting out a loud tap as his fingers hit the paper. I refuse to believe that the knowledge you need will come from that window rather than here. That girl across the river can do nothing for you except to be an easy distraction. Desmond felt his face heat up as he tried to hide behind a fallen lock of brown hair. The stern voice never failed to embarrass him. I wasn't thinking about Hannah, he protested, realizing his teacher could see right through the veiled fib. Oh, Hannah, is it? Gunther let out a teasing smile, crossing his arms across his chest. At least you've been studying love spells, I can see. The blood rushed through the apprentice's ears. What can you tell me about unicorns? Feeling his face glowing, Desmond hoped the question would change the subject. Gunther lowered his arms as surprised concern crossed his face. Unicorns? Why are you asking about those infernal beasts? He looked at Desmond with narrow eyes, his thick white eyebrows meeting. Taken aback by the severe reaction, Desmond regretted asking. Oh, just curious, he answered, trying to change the subject again. Gunther would not accept it. No, you are asking because you have a reason, not because you are curious. Well, I thought I saw a unicorn this afternoon. I must have been mistaken. He faked trying to get back to his reading. How can you be mistaken? Either you saw one or you didn't. Desmond looked up, not understanding his teacher's uneasiness. Okay, I wasn't mistaken. I did see a unicorn, a black one. It was walking by the river. I thought it was strange because I'd never seen one before. I mean, I've heard of unicorns, but I've never... Gunther interrupted. What was it doing? Just walking, I guess. Desmond shrugged. It didn't seem to be doing anything. It looked back at me, then it disappeared. Gunther grew silent, uncharacteristic for the wizard with always something to add. Desmond gave the book a nervous tap, debating whether he should ask about the strange electric feelings the unicorn caused him to have. What's the big deal? I thought they were supposed to bring good luck. The comment was greeted with a wet snort. Unicorns bring luck like stepping in horse manure brings luck. People who say it's lucky are those who stepped in it. Gunther gave a sarcastic laugh. Most don't appreciate that unicorns are just glorified horses. The fact they are in league with elves doesn't help either. His tone grew dark. What you witnessed is a bad omen. You're best to avoid it at all costs. They're not picky as to who they lure away. The teacher slapped the book with a flat, open hand. Now, get back to learning that spell like you're supposed to. Desmond was confused. Unicorns? Sinister? Bad omens? That goes against every story I've heard. He shifted in his chair, watching his mentor turn his back on him. I think it's people who are bad for unicorns, not the other way around. Men are always looking for ways to get their hands on their magical horns. The sight of Gunther resuming his categorizing answered his comments. There would be no more discussion. Desmond sank into the chair. Hannah, not seeing the unicorn, played in his memory. He made a mental note to ask her about it the next time he saw her. Thanks to work, however, that would not be for a couple of days. The sky slipped from orange-blue to slate-black, twinkling stars appearing against the darkness. With the night at last settled, Desmond glanced at the transformation spell. He didn't have much time before the candlelight became too bothersome to read by. Tomorrow, he would spend most of his time collecting vegetables from the garden and preparing them for storage. I should have asked the unicorn to share some of its magic. When will I have magic of my own? Disappointed, a quiet sigh escaped him as he closed the oversized book for the night. What did the old sorcerer see in him that he himself missed? Her dreams were bothersome at best. All the tossing and turning couldn't get Hannah into a comfortable position to sleep. Lying on her back, eyes wide open, she stared at the ceiling. Concentrating in darkness, she listened to the mice running through the straw above her. The black unicorn monopolized every thought she created. Alaric. She repeated the word softly until it developed a rhythm like rain on stone. That was his name. Hannah wanted so much to tell her mother and sisters what she saw, to share what she experienced. It was a dangerous idea, more to the unicorn than her. She fought the notion. This was her secret. It had to remain one. Alaric asked to meet her again. There wasn't even a debate as to whether she should. Everything else was changeable, but refuse an invitation from a unicorn? It was an impossible thought. Despite all the stories, there was no reason to believe this unicorn intended any harm. If he meant to kidnap her, he would have done so already, wouldn't he? Hannah pulled her blanket over her despite the warm night. A silver shaft of moonlight flooded the small room. Her two visiting older sisters slept on the opposite end of the room, oblivious to the inner conflicts their sibling was suffering. She envied the way they slumbered, yet cherished her unique experience. Giving up on ever attaining any restful sleep, she sat up, looking past the window into the peaceful woodland beyond. All sorts of shadows danced in the calm spring breeze. Hannah narrowed her eyes and shifted her head, trying to make out specific shapes. She stepped out from under her covers and tiptoed to the window. Leaning out on the windowsill, she stared out into the night. A sparkle against the silhouettes made the girl's heart jump. Hannah braced herself to keep from letting out a cry of surprise and risk waking her sisters. Leaning out the window to get a better look, Alaric's form appeared in the nearby wood, his ivory horn the source of the faint light. Tomorrow, she spoke into the darkness, fighting the urge to jump out and join him. I will meet you like I promised. The great stallion stood in the moonlight and then melted back into the darkness. Hannah rested her head in her hand and could do nothing more than stare, enchanted by the fact that such a magical creature would cast his eyes on her. Tomorrow, she repeated, until her eyelids became heavier with each slow wink. She leaned on the windowsill as she drifted into sleep, a slight smile across her lips. Desmond wiped the sweat from his brow, leaving a dark streak of mud on his forehead. Lettuce, carrots, celery, and other food plants overflowed from the pushcart sitting at the edge of the garden. As his student dug, Gunther would fill a basket to bring the bounty into the house. It had been a good season. The plants came out more plentiful than usual, the surplus allowing them to sell off the remainder of what they couldn't store. There was only so much space, and the extra money didn't hurt either. Ah, the exciting life of a wizard, Desmond said, half joking. Hot, tired, and covered in dirt, he looked forward to using it as an excuse to go to the river to see Hannah. Just make sure to wash first, he reminded himself, knowing that maidens were, without fail, not attracted to filthy apprentices. Attracted? Yes, he was attracted to Hannah. Very much so, in fact. However, he never told her how he felt. He would visit her, and she didn't hide the fact that she enjoyed his company. After agonizing, Desmond decided that today he was going to see her face to face, and maybe, just maybe, muster enough courage. "Have you been studying the transformation spell as I asked?" His teacher's voice broke the trance. Desmond looked up to see Gunther filling his basket with the last vegetables. "You've been very distracted, much to my displeasure." "You think you're disappointed." Desmond tossed the hand shovel aside. "I don't know why I even bother. I have yet to master any real spells since I started." "Floating objects is not a real spell. You seem to use it every chance you can." "Oh, that's trivial stuff." Desmond rubbed at the ground and soil from his clothing to no avail. "I feel like I'm training for a sideshow. All my other friends are mastering fire spells and illusions. I can almost make dishes float." Gunther wrapped a sympathetic hand around Desmond's disillusioned shoulder. "Never compare things that can't be compared. You have great magic within you. Maybe you can't see it now, but you will soon enough. Your friends are your friends, but they are just that. They are not you. Their skills may look impressive, but in the long run, it's the deeper magic that is worth working for." The old wizard thought for a bit, a mischievous smile crossing his face. "Maybe what your magic needs is a different incentive." Desmond blinked, not understanding. "Look, I was not always as old as I am now, despite what you may want to believe. I know where young men's minds wander. I was no different. What you need to do is refocus yourself. If you cannot convince your magic to come out to serve a king, then maybe it will to win a girl's heart." Desmond looked away from his teacher, feeling self-conscious. He didn't know how to react to him speaking on such a personal level. "Do you think so?" "Maybe it will be enough to get the magic flowing a bit. You won't find out unless you visit her regularly for a change, instead of acting like fools screaming across rivers." "But what about all the work?" "There will always be work, but true love is a little bit harder to come by." The young man's chest swelled with newfound energy, soon followed by a hard smack. "Just don't make it the only thing you do," Gunther added, with a less joking, yet not too serious tone. "Love may not come by often, but it's the hard work that keeps food in your belly and gold in your pockets." Desmond laughed as he watched his teacher walk back into the house. "You're not as crazy as I sometimes think you are," he muttered. Putting away his tools, he began preparing himself for the biggest challenge he had ever faced: courting Hannah. The girl did not succeed in escaping the notice of her older sisters as she scurried out of the house. Despite her lack of sleep, Hannah had awoken, intending to finish her chores early. She was still embarrassed to have been discovered sleeping on the windowsill by her mother, who escorted the unconscious girl back to bed. At least she was glad to have gotten some rest. Now she faced a new pair of spies as her sisters giggled at their siblings' antics. Hannah was dressed in her best clothes as she braided wildflowers in her hair. "And where is our princess heading off today?" Jenny's voice rang with gentle mocking. "Why, to meet her prince, of course," Marian answered with an equal sting. Hannah tried to ignore their teasing as she kissed her mother goodbye. "I'll try not to be long," she said as she ran out the door. All three women smiled as they watched her race towards the river. "Do you think she's finally caught the attention of Gunther's apprentice?" Mother asked her remaining daughters as her youngest disappeared from view. "She's had his heart since they first met," Jenny replied, fanning herself for effect. They giggled at the display, wishing the maiden well. Hannah knew she had arrived too soon, but waiting for the unicorn did not bother her. She sat in the same spot Alaric had met her before, spreading her dress around her for dramatic effect. She dusted herself off for good measure, redoing questionable braids. Hannah wanted to look her best for the black unicorn, if he came. As she postured, a moment of dread set in. What if the unicorn didn't come? She had worked so hard to see him. What if someone found her before the unicorn came? Or worse, while he was with her? As long as unicorns existed, people were always after their horns. The last thing Hannah wanted was to put the magnificent creature in danger. Hannah closed her eyes, folding her hands in her lap, calming herself as best as possible. She posed as she thought any maiden in legend would do to capture a unicorn, though capture was not what she intended. She concentrated on the gentle rushing of the river, feeling the breeze rustle the flowers in her hair. The sun was warm on her face as an overwhelming serenity filled her heart. "You look beautiful," a voice spoke. Hannah snapped from her reverie. Alaric walked with graceful ivory steps, looking at her with deep blue eyes. She couldn't find any words to greet him, so she flashed a bright smile. Alaric kneeled next to her, placing his head in her hands. Hannah leaned against him, her delicate fingers brushing through the silk mane. Wrapping her arms around his powerful neck, a tense breath made her catch herself. I'm sorry." Feeling awkward, Hannah pulled away, gathering up her gown. The unicorn looked at her with unblinking eyes. "Have I offended you?" Alaric asked as the girl shifted her weight with nervous energy. Hannah shook her head, unsure what to do next. "You far from offend me," she replied. "I know many a girl who would give so much to be where I am now." "If you did not wish to be with me, you did not have to make your promise." Hannah felt herself blush with intense embarrassment. "I didn't break my promise. I am here just as I said. It's just that—" Her voice trailed as she struggled to find the words that wouldn't upset the unicorn. "Forgive me for saying, but as much as I want to, being here goes against everything my family taught me." Alaric continued watching her. No anger or confusion crossed his muzzle. The lack of emotional response made Hannah uncomfortable. "Tell me, what is it that you have been told?" the unicorn asked. She felt herself blush more. I don't want to offend you. I should be going." The unicorn turned away, watching the river. Despite her protest, Hannah could not get herself to leave. "Do you fear me?" Hannah thought about the question. "I know I should," she answered with honesty. "Unicorns steal away people for the pleasures of the elves that care for you, enchanting them so that they may never return to the mortal world." The unicorn turned back to her. "But do you fear me?" "No, I don't. I have also heard that unicorns are kind, peaceful creatures who are done more harm by man than the other way around. I have no reason to believe that you are not one of those unicorns." She saw Alaric smile and couldn't help but smile back. "So, if you do not fear me, why do you stand ready to run? Do you believe in your heart that I intend you no harm?" The girl nodded. Alaric continued. "I enjoy the company of humans, but I must choose my company with great care. Would it comfort you that I cannot enchant you without your permission?" "What do you mean by that?" Hannah asked. "I thought that magic could take anyone." "No, if it were that easy, you would have been mine without question," the unicorn answered. "But there you are, ready to leave me. If you wish, you may return home. But be sure I will not be here if you change your mind." He turned away from her. Hannah stood frozen, questioning as to what course she should take. In her mind, her mother's voice echoed with warning. On the other hand, a unicorn, the most magical of creatures, wanted to spend time with her. The thought of walking out on him seemed beyond any measure of rudeness. Not being able to see the unicorn again created a dull pain in her heart. "No, I must leave," Hannah answered rather unconvincingly. "I cannot stay here." She picked up her dropped hem and gave the black unicorn a hesitant second glance. "I must go home." Each step she took was heavy and unsure. The further she walked, the more she wondered whether it was right to refuse a lonesome unicorn a little cordial company. She stopped, passing a nervous hand on her throat. "Alaric? Please, don't leave!" She puffed as she ran back to where the unicorn had stayed. "You say I cannot be enchanted without my permission, right?" Alaric nodded. "Nothing will happen unless you decide you want it to happen." There was a pause as the girl processed his words with caution, trying to balance wisdom with want. Hannah walked over, lowering herself next to him. "Well, I don't mind staying with you then," she replied. The unicorn smiled again. "I am pleased you've given me that. Put your arm around me. It gives me great comfort." Hannah did as the unicorn told. She snuggled closer, feeling the warm effervescence of magic radiating from him. The sensation was calming. She buried her face in his long mane, breathing in deeply his fragrant scent. They sat silently, watching the river water pass over smooth stones, sparkling like diamonds in the sun. Desmond followed the neat path to the cottage as he had many times before, except this time with excited nervousness in his steps. Hannah's mother was a midwife, growing many odd exotic plants not found in town. There was no trading today, as Gunther had done many times. However, his mission was no less important. As he neared the house, he saw Hannah's mother enjoying the day, sitting out front with her 2 daughters. Jenny and Marion were married to well-to-do merchants and spent the week visiting their reserved mother and youngest sister. They drank lemonade while fanning themselves, laughing at the latest gossip. As the young apprentice came into close enough view, the talking stopped. The 3 of them gave broad smiles as all eyes turned on him. Hello," he said, offering a polite bow. "Why, hello there, Desmond," Hannah's mother answered. "Quite a surprise to find you here." "Indeed," Jenny added, fanning herself. Marion settled for another sip of her lemonade. Desmond rubbed the back of his neck with a nervous hand. "I was hoping to find Hannah here, but I guess she's not. I didn't see her do her chores." "She did them early," Marion said, "and left as soon as she finished." "Indeed again," Jenny replied. "She dressed up in her best clothing, even brushing out that tangled nest of hair of hers." Hannah's mother began to realize the situation wasn't as they had assumed. "We thought she was with you." Jenny and Marion glanced at each other. "No, she's not," Desmond replied, fidgeting with embarrassment. This was kind of a surprise. She wasn't expecting me." He began to walk away. "Wait! I can confidently say that I saw her head down to the river. If you go, you can catch up with her." Hannah's mother pointed to the general area behind the house. "True," Marion added. "It's not like there's anyone else around here she's going to meet up with, and town is much too far to go by foot. She may be waiting for you and you don't know it." "Surprises for everyone," Jenny exclaimed, waving her fan in the air to literally wave away the rising awkward feelings. Desmond smiled, thanking the ladies for their words of encouragement. Taking quick steps, he went towards the other side of the river until recently he would shout over. The 3 women followed his moves, knowing he was trying to avoid their gazes. As he disappeared around the corner of the cottage, they burst into giggles again, although Hannah's mother sported a little more concern on her face. "This is not going to turn out like we're hoping," she thought, hiding her growing apprehension. Turning back to her chattering daughters, she joined in their informal conversation, content to see how events unfold before making her uneasiness known. What did they mean she couldn't be with someone else? Desmond contemplated as he walked alongside the river. Is there someone else to worry about? I don't remember anyone else living around here. Paranoia began to settle in his already racing mind. Marion is right. Town is too far to go on foot. They don't even have the means for Hannah to go all the time, even if there was someone. He tried not to think too hard about what they were implying. He felt his heart grow heavy, his stomach queasy with every assumption. A figure sitting alone on the grass came into view, releasing a small sigh of relief from him. Desmond was used to seeing her in drab work clothes, which consisted of a coarse wool shirt and brown skirt. Along with the flowers in her braided short hair, she wore an intricate embroidered dress made of red velvet and gold thread. Not the type a girl should wear to lounge in a damp pasture. He had never seen her as beautiful as she was then and couldn't help but stare. Hannah sat entranced by something in her fingers, not noticing Desmond until he finally called her attention. "Hello," he shyly started. "I was told you'd be here." Hannah looked up, startled by the sudden talking. "Oh, hello," she answered, distracted by what looked to be a lock of black hair. He sat beside her, leaning over to see what she had. "What do you have there?" he asked. Her small hand closed on the lock, almost hesitant to show him. "It's a gift." He looked away for a moment, unsure what to make of it. "It looks like a lock of hair to me. What kind of gift is that?" "Remember when you asked me if I noticed the unicorn by the river?" "And you said you didn't see it." "Well, I didn't see it then," Hannah continued with uncertainty. "I'm not sure why. I can't believe I missed Alaric that first time." "Alaric?" He found himself having trouble with the name. "Who's that?" "The black unicorn you saw," Hannah answered with slight disbelief. "After I had finished my chores that day, I went and took a stroll. It was in this spot that he revealed himself to me." Gunther's ominous words echoed in the young man's mind. "He told me his name was Alaric, and he wanted me to meet him again. Can you believe it?" Hannah's face beamed with dreamy excitement, causing anxiety in her companion. "What else did he tell you?" Desmond asked, watching how her fingers caressed the silky lock of black hair. At first, she hesitated to share her experience with Desmond, but he wasn't the type to harm anything, much less a unicorn, and she had such an urge to tell someone. "Alaric is the leader of a herd of unicorns living in a faraway valley with a kingdom of elves. The unicorns help the elves cross over, whatever that means, in exchange for their protection." Crossing over is what an elf does when they decide they have spent enough time in this world. Desmond searched his memory for other facts. They can do it themselves, but it requires a lot of magic, leaving them very weak on the other side. Unicorns can cross over without much thought, or at least that's what I've heard. It's only natural elves would make such a pact with them. "I didn't know you knew so much about elves," she nudged him playfully. "I do have to study once in a while," he answered back. "What do you think I do all day? Gather vegetables?" "And firewood, and herbs, and frogs, and whatever else that crazy teacher of yours needs." Desmond laughed. "It seems that way most of the time." He looked again at the lock of hair, reaching for it. "What is that you're holding anyway?" "Alaric gave it to me." Hannah allowed him to take the lock from her. "I was braiding his mane when he told me to take something to remember him by, and it just slipped into my hand." Desmond studied the unicorn's mane. Braided halfway, it shone with its own brilliance, swaying in the slightest breeze like water, feeling soft like fine silk. He gave it back to Hannah. "It must be exciting to see a unicorn up close like you did." Her eyes lit up. "It was amazing. You can feel their magic flowing through them. If I didn't know any better, I think I have gotten some magic for myself." "Then maybe I should hug you and borrow some. I seem to need all the help I can get." They both giggled at the thought, ending with an awkward pause. "Alaric wants me to see him again." Desmond felt a chill at her words. She noticed a change in his demeanor. "You don't think that's a good idea, don't you?" Desmond rubbed the back of his neck, a habit cropping up more often than he'd like. "I don't want to ruin your moment, but I'm afraid of what it means when a unicorn requests an audience with a maiden." The worst part was that it was with his maiden. Hannah eyed the lock of hair again. "I'm not sure what to make of all this. I know all the stories, too. I shouldn't have met him, but I don't feel he's out to hurt me." "I'm not saying he's going to hurt you," Desmond answered. "I'm sure that's not his intention at all. You must remember that it's not for himself that he wants you." "He said he wouldn't." Her voice trailed. The young couple sat silently, watching the blue sky melt into an orange-red blaze. Looking at her, Desmond knew Hannah's thoughts were of the unicorn. "Here, I want to show you something before we head home." Desmond reached into his shirt and pulled out a piece of blue cloth. "I've been practicing this for the last couple of days, and I think I got it." Hannah turned to him, intrigued by his words. "What are you going to do with a blue handkerchief?" "Hope that Gunther doesn't notice it's missing," Desmond replied. "His collection may look haphazard, but he knows where everything is when he needs it. By the way, this is his good handkerchief." "As opposed to a bad one?" "No, silly. This one he keeps on him when he has to make important house calls. It's part of his official wardrobe. It's silk." Desmond thought for a moment. Although made of silk, the handkerchief did not compare to the lock's softness. He couldn't even compare the hair to silk any longer. "So, are you going to show me something, or just show off stolen property?" "It's not stolen." Desmond smirked at her comment. "I'm just borrowing it for this occasion." Okay. Now get on with it." She waved an eager hand. "The suspense is killing me." Desmond adjusted himself to face Hannah, clearing his throat for effect. "Observe, an ordinary handkerchief," he announced. "Not used in the ordinary fashion, I hope," Hannah giggled, not missing the chance to taunt him. "Hey, I'm a grand wizard. I wouldn't use a dirty handkerchief." "1 out of 2 isn't bad, considering this is the first time you've attempted to show me any of your spells." Desmond waved the handkerchief in an exaggerated motion, thrilled at the fact that he had her complete attention. "Okay, I'm not a grand wizard, but I'm working on it, so if you don't mind." "Not at all." Snapping the handkerchief in the air again, Desmond crumpled the fabric into his fist. Closing his eyes, he began envisioning the words on the page he had been trying so hard to commit to memory. At the same time, he offered a little prayer to get the spell right, especially since Hannah was watching. He took a deep breath, waved his hand over his fist, and began his work. Hannah leaned closer, trying to understand the words he was mumbling. Looking at his fist, she contemplated what she was supposed to be looking for, or what was even supposed to happen. As she was about to speak, the kerchief squirmed, wriggling its way out of Desmond's hand. As it inched out, it snaked up, waving and weaving to the imaginary music of a charmer's pipes. "The handkerchief isn't crawling, it's growing like a plant," she gasped, enthralled. Desmond continued with his spell, trying not to get caught up in the girl's reaction. Hannah laughed again. "I can't believe you can concentrate at all while this is happening." The plant continued to inch upwards, its leaves sprouting, until a bud began to form and unfold. Hannah's green eyes widened in wonder as the bud revealed a blue rose. Desmond stopped chanting and opened his tired eyes. Casting spells took a lot out of him, and this time was no exception. Extending his hand, he presented the rose to a still shocked Hannah. "For the Unicorn Princess." "I can't believe it! You turned the kerchief into a rose!" For someone who had spent an afternoon with a unicorn, she was still impressed by such a modest display of magic. She took the rose, studying it carefully, almost forgetting the lock of hair she had been holding the whole time. "I've never seen anyone do magic this close before," she said, pride filling Desmond's face. "I've never had a spell work that well before," he replied, just as amazed with his accomplishment as she was. "It's a transforming spell Gunther has been trying to teach me for a while. I can transform things into anything I want." Hannah closed her eyes, bringing the blue bud to her nose and inhaling its scent. She pulled the rose away, a bewildered look across her face. "Not quite." "What?" Hannah held the rose for him to look at. The rose isn't real. What? Of course it is. That's how the spell is supposed to work. Desmond sputtered in disbelief. Supposed to, maybe, Hannah replied. But look, the stem and the thorns are real, but the bud is made from the handkerchief. He took the rose out of her hand and examined it himself. Feel it. It's silk. It doesn't even have a flower scent, she explained. Oh. Desmond became even more amazed by the unintentional results. They both began to stand as he continued studying the flower, knowing it was time to go home soon. At least it'll never die, he said, handing the rose back to Hannah as she brushed off her dress. I'll cherish it always then. The sky darkened, the orange hue melting away. It's getting late, and you should be getting home before your mother begins to worry. Would you mind if I accompanied you home? The maiden curtsied before him. I would be honored to be accompanied by the Grand Wizard Desmond. And I would be honored to join the Unicorn Princess. Hannah reached out and hooked her arm into Desmond's. They walked, savoring the moment. You know, maybe it is good luck to be visited by a unicorn, Desmond said, trying to dismiss his apprehension. Perhaps you did receive some of its magic. I doubt it, but it is a nice thought, though. Don't they also say that unicorns appear to virgins? I guess. Do you think this one was making an exception? The remark earned him a swift smack on the shoulder. Desmond! Hey, just kidding. You better be, silly boy. The stars began to peak as they reached the cottage on the outskirts of the forest. The couple faced each other for the final time that night. Desmond stood waiting for Hannah to go into her house. He suppressed a nervous shiver. I enjoyed your spell, even if it didn't turn out how you wanted. Thank you, Hannah. I am glad you liked it. They looked at each other for a second. Well, I'd better be getting inside. It's dark now. Oh, yes, of course. Hannah turned, reaching for the metal handle of her door. Hannah? Yes, Desmond. She glanced over her shoulder. Desmond fidgeted as he tried to gather the courage to speak his last words to her. Hannah turned, facing him, waiting. All he could do was stare into her green eyes. I wish you a good night, Hannah, he replied, unable to control the apologetic smile crossing his face. Hannah's lips pulled into a slight grin. Good night, Desmond. And thank you again. Desmond stood in the dark, Hannah opening the door as quietly as possible, disappearing into the candlelit house. After he was sure she was safe inside, he slapped his forehead, cursing his hesitation. I'm such an idiot, he scolded himself as he started to make his way back home. He walked his familiar trail, smiling at the realization that even though he missed an opportunity to tell Hannah his feelings, he at least was able to be the center of her attention for a little while, unicorn or no unicorn. The next few days were disconcerting at best. Not only did Gunther notice the blue handkerchief gone, but Desmond found that no matter how hard he tried, he could not repeat the spell to prove to his teacher what had happened. Would it help if I wore a dress? Gunther replied to the embarrassment of his student. Desmond agonized over his sudden loss as he, in vain, worked to duplicate the results from the other night. Gunther tried to distract the boy as much as he could, concerned over the obsessive behavior towards the one's spell. Desmond was determined to show his mentor what he showed Hannah, fueled by the fact that he had been unable to see her since that night. Each time he went to visit, she was either unavailable or just not there at all. Her mother was also worried about her youngest daughter's sudden distraction. At first, she thought Hannah was running off with Desmond, something she didn't mind and in fact encouraged. Her happiness would fade as Desmond appeared at her door, looking for Hannah hours after she had gone. She couldn't help thinking the worst. The forest hid as many dangers as it did beautiful things. Did she mention anything? Desmond asked, hiding his suspicion. I'm worried maybe I had done something to offend her. Hannah's mother shook her head, confused and saddened. She has mentioned nothing about anything. It worries me. Every day it is the same. Hannah rushes to do her chores, dresses up in her finest, then disappears into the forest for hours. An awkward moment passed between them, both mother and apprentice not ready to reveal their fears to each other. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about, Desmond replied, hating having to lie. You know how girls can get, caught up in flights of fancy. He tried to offer a smile. Maybe you're right, she answered, revealing the knowledge Desmond was striving to hide. As they bid each other farewell, Desmond couldn't help thinking about when he last saw her. Maybe this is all an exaggeration, he thought. Maybe she didn't think the spell presentation was as romantic as I thought it would be. Maybe she didn't say anything because she didn't want to offend me. Or maybe it's the black unicorn, he spoke aloud with growing resentment. He felt a mixture of emotions well up inside. Why did it take a glorified horse to make me realize I cared so much for her? His anger made his words slide out like a growl. I always knew. I was too afraid to tell her. Now the minute she starts talking about unicorns, I suddenly have to compete with one. It wasn't the unicorn that bothered him as much as why the unicorn was showing any interest in Hannah. He had to talk to Gunther. If anyone would know what to do, he would, he hoped. As he walked through the thicket, humming began to echo nearby. Recognizing the voice, Desmond followed the sound's direction. He entered an intimate clearing brimming with colorful wildflowers in bloom. In its center, sitting on the ground, was Hannah. She was oblivious to his presence. She continued humming and picking the flowers, piling them in a small basket. Hey there, Desmond started, letting out a sigh of relief. I haven't seen you in a while. Hannah turned her head to face him, still distracted by her work. Hi there yourself. I'm surprised to see you here. As am I of you. He approached her, peeking at the basket where she placed the flowers. I wasn't expecting to see you here. I was just coming back from your house. Your mother's pretty worried. Oh, I'll be heading home later. I want to finish my garland for Alaric. Desmond cringed at the sound of the unicorn's name. He's so beautiful. I wish you could see him. I can't wait to meet with him again. She looked ahead, sighing as if caught in a dream. Don't you think it's odd for you to be visiting a unicorn so much? His worry for her grew as he watched the disturbing production before him. You have no idea what magical creatures are even up to. It's common knowledge what unicorns are known for doing. Hannah jumped up, her face wrinkled with rage. Flowers in her lap tumbled to the ground with an ungrateful heap. How dare you speak that way? Alaric is kind and gentle. He would never hurt me. He has already told me he wouldn't take me to the elves. I was just worried, Desmond replied, his voice cracking. Her fiery reaction took him aback, something he had never seen in her. It's the elves, not the unicorns who are the problem, with them unable to breed without humans and such. He hoped the backpedaling would win him back onto her good side. That has nothing to do with it, she snapped. You're jealous that I'm spending more time with Alaric than with you. What? Desmond blushed at her accusation, letting out a nervous laugh. How can I be jealous of a unicorn? What else could it be? Without looking at him, Hannah went over to her basket and grabbed it. Flowers clinging to the edge made their escape to the ground. You've been trying to discourage me from seeing Alaric ever since I told you about him. The backlash still dumbfounded the apprentice. Of course I don't want you to see him. I'm sure if anyone else knew, they would not want you to see him either. Hannah's eyes widened in shock. You wouldn't dare tell anyone about Alaric, would you? Tell me you won't. He's a unicorn, Hannah. A creature of magic. If you're under some kind of spell, I have no choice. I am not under a spell. Her voice rose to a shrill screech. Alaric told me I couldn't be enchanted if I didn't want to be. Desmond shook his head, not believing he was arguing with her. That's ridiculous. I've never heard of anything like that. Magic doesn't work that way. The girl's green eyes narrowed, her words hissing. What would you know about magic, Desmond? Just because you can impress me with a child's trick doesn't make you a wizard. You can't control your magic because you choose not to. I choose not to be under any spell. All the yelling could not have prepared Desmond for such a pointed attack from Hannah most of all. He choked, feeling the wind knocked out of him. When you decide to abandon your childish jealousies, you know where to find me. With a huff, she disappeared into the brush. I don't know where to find you. That's the problem, he shouted to a now empty space, his voice trailing. And I'm not jealous. Hannah never once had raised her voice, much less attacked him in such a personal manner until the unicorn came around. The beast was not interested in her out of the kindness of his heart. There has to be a way to distract her enough from Alaric to break whatever spell is on her. There must be. An idea began brewing as the garden he worked so hard to tend came into view. A unicorn, huh? The old mare trotted down the well-worn path. Gunther slouched in the cart, mentally organizing his new acquisitions. They turned onto a narrow trail cutting into the woods. Leaves crunched underneath as they descended on the overgrown trail heading home. As they got closer, a pounding echoed from the garden area, Gunther becoming curious. He couldn't remember anything being broken. Tying the mare to a post by the door, the old wizard headed towards the back. Desmond was busy chopping away at some wood, measuring each fragment. An organized pile lay beside him, pieces cut into different lengths. What are you up to, boy? Gunther asked, trying to figure out the pattern the blocks appeared to be making. Nothing yet, Desmond wiped his brow. Just experimenting. Well, Tessa's out front. I'd be appreciative if you go tend to her. Desmond put down his axe with the obedience he had always shown his teacher. Gunther looked at the wood again, perplexed, as Desmond headed to take care of the mare and the cart. Tessa stood still as Desmond unhooked her harness. He led her to her stall, which was nothing more than a converted shed surrounded by a fence. It created a lovely little paddock for her to run in if she ever felt inclined to do so. He brushed her off, then filled her bucket with fresh water, giving her alfalfa and oats to eat. Taking his hand, Desmond traced her pale brown back, still thinking about his project. Running his fingers through her coarse silver mane, he gave her a goodbye pat on her thick neck, leaving the stall. He returned to see Gunther putting away the supplies. A loaf of fresh bread was on the table, its inviting smell causing a rumbling in his stomach. Knowing that Gunther hadn't eaten yet, Desmond began to set the table for himself and his teacher. Fruit, mild cheese, fresh bread, and wine made a combination the wizard couldn't resist for long. I noticed all of the books out, Gunther said as they sat and ate. They're all turned to pages about unicorns. I just wanted to learn more about them, Desmond replied. And the wood out back, Gunther continued. They're arranged in the most peculiar pattern, like you're going to carve something big. Like I said, it's just a project. About unicorns, I take it. Desmond sat in silence, unsure whether he should say anything more. Gunther looked down, chewing his food. It's about that girl by the river, right? Yes, Desmond realized he couldn't keep this hidden. Remember when I told you about seeing a black unicorn? I discovered I wasn't the only one who saw him. Hannah has fallen for the unicorn, Gunther blurted, emotionless. I guess it was inevitable. I was hoping it wasn't, Desmond sounded forlorn. I thought it was just a girl thing. They always wish they could see a unicorn, and Hannah did. Of course, it ended up different than expected. Gunther wiped his mouth, coughing a bit. I never understood why people think there's something magical about magical creatures. They're no different than any other animal in the forest. Do you think we're any better off because we can cast spells? It makes our lives harder because people start treating us like gods. Or servants, Desmond added, reining in the snide inflection. Huh, just like servants, Gunther continued. But unicorns? You have virginal girls lining up from here to the ends of earth waiting to see one, not understanding what unicorns indeed do. Well, the ones that live with elves, that is. True, I have heard of wild unicorns not associated with anyone. However, that's not what we're talking about here, are we? Desmond nodded. Hannah told me this unicorn was from some valley where a kingdom of elves also takes residence. Edenron, Gunther answered. That unicorn has come quite a way for his prize. Those elves are the worst of all of them. Yes, I can see why you're preoccupied. Let's hope she doesn't take too much of the beast's fancy. Desmond paused, attempting to suppress the pain he felt. It's too late. I think she's enchanted, he half whispered. Oh my. Gunther put a hand to his mouth. Now I see what this is all about. It started a couple of days ago. At first, we didn't think anything of it. It was like our little secret. I didn't think it would do anything since Hannah didn't seem affected. At first. Desmond agreed, despondent. She told me she would see him. She seemed okay. I didn't want to make an issue of it. Let her have her fun. It's not every day anyone sees a unicorn. There's a reason for that. Then you noticed her change. Desmond found it more and more difficult. Hannah started becoming obsessed with him. I'd go see her, and either she wasn't around or all she would talk about is the unicorn. Does her mother know? Gunther began to search his mind for anything he could think of to help. She knows there is bad magic about, but doesn't know what's causing it. I haven't had the heart to tell her the whole story. Not that it would have helped any, Gunther replied. Once a unicorn sets its spell, it cannot be broken. I'm sorry, but there is nothing I can tell you to make you feel better. There has to be something. Desmond leaned forward, accenting his protest. The unicorn told her that she can choose to be enchanted, so there must be a way for her to unchoose. Choose to be enchanted? Gunther let out a cynical laugh. Without a doubt it would say that. If she were a sorceress, maybe its words would hold some truth. The more she says she's not enchanted, the more I know she is. Gunther leaned forward, locking stern eyes on his student. There is nothing you can do for her, Desmond. Hannah has been chosen. A unicorn's magic is too strong for a mere girl to break, near impossible even. Although I find it strange that she hasn't been taken yet. It will be a matter of time. You will do your best not to interfere. Let her go. If you try to force her to stay, the strength of the magic's hold will kill her. Desmond leaned back in his chair. I've read that in your books. When a maiden is used to lure unicorns to be slaughtered, her heart fills with so much guilt and grief she wastes away. That's why the practice isn't used or encouraged anymore. The realm values its maidens more than its want for unicorn horns. But if there is the smallest chance that a maiden's will can end an enchantment, then I'm going to have to convince Hannah to do just that, Desmond muttered as he finished eating. Gunther felt disheartened. It pained him to realize that his student would have to learn this hard lesson on his own. Desmond worked nonstop. He continued to try to visit Hannah, only to find the unicorn monopolizing more of her time. His heart would break when her mother would answer their door. It was clear she knew all too well what was happening, realizing there was nothing anyone could do. Yet as his creation began to take shape, Desmond grew hopeful that maybe he could change that. Gunther figured it would be best to let the situation run to its sad conclusion. Occasionally, he would call his busy student for some small errands. Mostly, he left them alone until his curiosity could not allow him to do so anymore. Gunther headed to the shed, not knowing what to expect from his determined apprentice. Desmond stood by the open doorway, sweaty and covered in wood shavings. As Gunther entered, shards of sunlight broke in between the wood panels of the flimsy shack. In the very back was the beginning of a wooden unicorn. It was a life-size carving, still crude, its head beginning to show fine details. The spiral horn was lying on the table, finished. It would be attached when the rest of the head and body reached a certain level of completion. It was an impressive effort. Gunther couldn't help but marvel at the attention being given to it. As he studied the shape further, something began to bother him. He began to understand on closer examination, not liking one bit of it. "Well, you are undoubtedly making a wooden unicorn." "That's what it is," replied Desmond as he shook shavings out of his hair. Gunther stared at the carved-out interior. "Tell me it is staying hollow so that it's light enough to carry." "Please, Gunther, don't judge me." He looked away, unable to look at his teacher without feeling uneasy. "If Hannah is allowing herself to be courted by a unicorn, then I have no choice but to compete any way I can." "I can't believe you are thinking of cramming yourself into that thing. I must admit, it's the first time you've left me altogether speechless." Gunther couldn't decide if he felt pity for his apprentice or disgust. "I'd do anything for her. You don't have to understand. A unicorn stole my maiden's love before I could even begin to tell her how I felt. If I have to do this ridiculous thing to prove to her that I love her, then I will." "I cannot condone any part of it," Gunther said in a low voice. "Go back to your carving, but you can be sure you will get no help from me." He turned and walked out of the shed, stopping only to look right into Desmond's eyes. "When you decide to be a serious student, then we may talk. Not otherwise. This situation is getting way out of hand." Desmond felt hurt at the words, yet knew he had to continue. He worked for several more hours. As he stepped back to examine how the piece was coming out, he realized he wasn't as convinced that the idea would work as he had before. Maybe his teacher was right. Maybe his idea of rolling around in a wood unicorn was too absurd to even bother with. He began to blush at the whole stupidity of it. "Maybe if I just took a part of it to her," Desmond began to speak out loud. "Maybe if Hannah saw how much effort I was putting into winning her, she'd snap out of whatever spellbind the unicorn has her under." With a confirming nod, he sawed off the near-completed head from the raw-formed body and attached the horn to it. Carving in a few more details, the wood unicorn head was ready. If he had more time, he would have created a display base. If things didn't work out as a wizard, at least he had his more modest carpentry skills to work with. He took a tattered blanket, wrapping the head as best he could. The long spiral horn stuck out of a hole in the fabric, making the element of surprise arguable. It would just have to do. He went back inside the main house to clean himself off to be more presentable. Hugging the wood unicorn to his chest, he took care with his walking to not trip and break his gift, or worse, impale himself on it. His mind flooded with what he thought would happen when he presented the gift to Hannah. He envisioned her accepting and wanting to be his just as much as he wanted to be hers. He was so wrapped up in thought he almost didn't see the large figure in front of him. Almost bumping into it, he stopped, startled in his tracks. The black unicorn blocked his path, his powerful frame seemingly enveloping the surrounding forest. The deep blue eyes and ivory horn were all Desmond could focus on. "Alaric," he whispered, clutching the wood head closer. The unicorn seemed more imposing than the first time. Desmond felt himself shrink before the magnificent animal, lowering his eyes in embarrassment. How could he have been so arrogant as to think he could deceive Hannah into loving him by use of a crude effigy? Alaric's beauty and the magic entangled in it were too much for Desmond to bear. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he blinked hard to control them. The unicorn's magic was indeed powerful. "You will not succeed in your quest. You know that, don't you?" the unicorn spoke. "The magic has done what it will. The girl is no longer of this place. You have a good heart, though. I am sorry that you must have it broken this way." Alaric's voice held an apologetic resonance at what his task was causing, although he was not remorseful. Desmond stood speechless. Alaric stepped forward, closer to the boy, sniffing about him. Desmond felt himself hold his breath. The unicorn looked into his eyes, a small smile crossing his muzzle. "Now I understand," Alaric replied, nodding. "Understand what?" Desmond's voice cracked with nervousness. The unicorn pressed his muzzle against Desmond's arm, giving him a slight, almost playful push. "If it's any consolation, you were my original goal. You were so willing to follow me. Something was keeping the magic from taking you." Desmond's eyes flashed with realization. "Those feelings, that sensation, that was your magic?" "No," Alaric answered. "Those feelings were your magic. I should have known you were a sorcerer." "I am not a sorcerer." Desmond felt both uneasy and excited at the same time. "You will be. Your magic is very powerful. It is just not ready yet. However, it is active enough to protect you." Alaric turned his head away, watching Desmond through the corner of his eye. "A shame. You would have been quite a prize." Desmond felt his face heat up. "A prize?" The words fell out of the boy's mouth. The unicorn's intentions were made clear. They were trinkets to him, himself, Hannah, and whomever else Alaric would have come across that caught his fancy. Sheep to be gathered for elven masters, for whatever they wanted humans for. "Why did you have to take her?" Desmond asked, his voice a whisper, but the growing anger clear. "Why?" The decision was just as much hers. Alaric's indifference enraged him. "Don't try to fool yourself with your own lies. The only decision was the one you made. You were here for one purpose, and that was to get someone. It didn't matter who you took, but in the end it was Hannah. Your magic keeps her bound to you. You tricked her into spending enough time, opening enough to you so that your magic could take root." Desmond began to tremble. His fingers dug into the fabric-covered wood. "You think flattering me will get me to forget all this? Let her go? Don't think I know nothing of you or your kind, horse." He didn't feel so overwhelmed anymore. The unicorn flinched at his words. "You know less than you think. It is unwise to bring forth such a challenge." Alaric stepped forward. "Don't think your hidden talent is enough to keep me from taking you as well. The minute I do, you will forget about the girl, instead thinking of your new masters." "Then do it!" he snarled, calling his bluff. "Show me how powerful you are. Take me right now. Break Hannah's spell. You said you can, so prove me wrong." Alaric snorted, pounding a sharp hoof into the grass. The boy was not intimidated by the display. The unicorn closed his eyes. "I am not asking you to understand any of this. In the end, you are mortal, bound by different rules. The magic has done its will. Even I cannot undo that, no matter how much I want to. And because of that, I too may lose her. You are not alone here with a broken heart." He lowered his head, pointing the lethal horn at his rival. "You do best by listening to your teacher. Let this run the way it is meant to. I cannot help her from her final call much longer, for the elves expect their bounty. I am honor-bound by it. You cannot change her destiny any more than you can change yours or mine." "I can change what I will to," Desmond challenged. "And what I will changes everything." Without another word, Alaric spun, jumping past him. Desmond did not turn to watch the unicorn leave. Instead, when all turned quiet, he raised the blanket-covered gift over his head. With a loud growl, he brought it down with all his might. The thin wood shattered against an exposed tree root, the horn shattering into pieces. He pressed his palms hard against his eyes, trying to control the welling anger as he gathered his thoughts. "I refuse to compete with that thing," Desmond growled. "I refuse to let him take Hannah because he wants to, and everyone says I should let him." He looked at his hands, balling them into tight fists. "I may not be a sorcerer, but I am a man, and I will do whatever it takes to keep a horse from taking away the woman I love." Desmond continued in the direction of Hannah's house. His purpose changed. He would no longer try to win her love with pathetic shows of gifts. He was going to break the spell any way he knew how. He would have to worry about the consequences later. Hannah was found in a small meadow by the river, face down in the grass. She had been weeping for quite a while, not noticing Desmond sitting quietly beside her. She looked up at him, her face dirty from tears and her eyes red and puffy. "Desmond, the most horrible thing has happened." Hannah sat up, falling into his arms. Desmond buried his face in her fiery red hair. He couldn't bear to see her hurting so much. "Alaric didn't intend on bringing me to the elves," she started with her tale. "That was his original purpose. However, something happened. Instead of taking me away, he just returned, staying here. I felt so at peace with him, like nothing else mattered in this world." As she sobbed, Desmond listened, remembering the unicorn's words. Hannah continued. "He told me he wanted to stay with me, protect me from the elves. He cannot survive outside the valley, though. He said something about a connection he couldn't break. I don't know." She wiped her face with her hands. "Alaric said he could no longer see me. He has to return to the valley." She paused, crying out loud. "He told me he loved me." No matter how much anger he harbored, the tears flowed down Desmond's cheeks. That a unicorn would have more courage to tell her that he loved her was impossible for him to bear. "I feel like I am going to die," Hannah sobbed. Wiping his tears away, Desmond took a deep breath and lifted Hannah's head to look into her emerald green eyes. "Please don't weep, my unicorn princess," he whispered. "I am not surprised by what you have told me. No living creature could resist you, god, man, or unicorn." A wild, frantic look overcame her. She clutched his collar with near violence, the fabric pinching his throat. "Don't flatter me, Desmond! This is tearing me to pieces! I love Alaric, and the thought of never seeing him again—" She looked away. "I'm going to kill myself!" She gasped at how hard Desmond grabbed her, holding her so close she could hear his heart racing like a jackrabbit chased by foxes. "No, Hannah, don't. Please don't ever say that. I will do anything to help you. Anything." "You must help me," she sobbed again. "Please, Desmond, I can trust no one save you." The apprentice nodded his head. I will help you." He hesitated. "I know what to do." "How?" Hannah looked at him with disbelief. "I've thought of a way." Nightfall came with a still, eerie air, a starless, clear sky capping the quiet wood. Anticipation hung thick like a dense fog, a soft rustling the only sound. Hannah appeared out of the darkness in a long white nightgown. "Desmond, are you here?" The apprentice came into sight, clutching a large worn book to his chest. "I'm right here," he answered. The young couple joined in the center of the meadow, away from the river and their homes. They needed assurance that no one would disturb them, regardless of what happened. Even in her simplest clothing, Desmond was overcome by Hannah's beauty. He wanted so much to take her into his arms and whisk her away from this place, away from any magic and unicorns. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, more for his own sake. "More than anything in this world." There was no doubt in her voice. The book was lowered onto the ground, each page being flipped through with great care. "I want you to know that I'm not sure if this spell will work, or what it will do to you if it does." "It is a risk I am willing to take." "I'm not sure if I am," Desmond answered, as he struggled with the fear and apprehension each moment brought him. He closed the book, undetermined to find the page he needed. The young woman took his hand into her own. He did not gain any comfort from it. "Desmond, please." Her small hands were warm in his palms as he gently squeezed them. Raising his head, his eyes caught hers. A chill tingled down his spine as her sparkling eyes betrayed an emptiness not of this world. Tears formed along his bottom eyelids, a hard swallow, his only defense against allowing them to fall. "I just want to see you happy. Despite what I want to believe, I can't force you to decide anything. It's your will alone." Desmond found difficulty in finishing his thoughts. "I would have preferred a different ending to this." He raised himself from his kneeling position, a nervous pause broken by his clearing his throat. "I want to tell you that—" Desmond leaned closer, her faint breathing warm against his skin. "I love you. I always have, and I always will. I never thought I would envy a unicorn for the sole reason of being able to tell you that." She smiled. "I know." Desmond leaned forward, his gentle lips meeting hers with a soft touch. Hannah averted her eyes as they pulled apart, backing away from each other without a word. She raised her fingertips to her lips, pressing as if giving a faint wipe. Desmond felt his chest lock at the small gesture, fighting the urge to break down. Even in that small kiss, her thoughts were never of him. The spell she was under was complete. Hannah had no intention of returning to the world that used to be her home. Desmond knew what had to be done. The book creaked open again, the delicate parchment making a sliding sound. "Ah, here it is." He took a deep breath, clearing his mind of all thoughts. An unusual calm overcame him as he looked over the page, focusing on the girl before him. "Now, close your eyes and hold your hands open. You must concentrate and not fight whatever you may feel. Understand?" Hannah nodded, following his instructions. "I trust you, Desmond," she whispered. Reaching down, he unclipped the pouch belted to his hip. "Good," he replied. "I need you to trust me. I need you to trust me more than you've ever trusted anyone, as if your life depended on it." "Yes, I do." Desmond reached into the leather bag, pulling out a coil of thin rope. Hannah stood as he told her, with her eyes closed, hands raised, unaware that he had stepped closer. He tightened his lips, focusing on his task. Hannah's smile faded as she realized Desmond's long pause. "Is everything all right?" she asked, without opening her eyes. The question forced the sorcerer's apprentice to make his move. "Everything's fine," he said, taking her hands into his own. "Everything is going to be fine." The noose wrapped around her wrists. The tightening rope snapped Hannah from her trance, her eyes widening in confusion and fear. "What are you doing?" Desmond wrapped more of the rope around her wrists as fast as he could. "I'm helping you, just like I said," he answered, his voice heavy with apology, yet not pausing in his task. "No, what are you doing to me? Let go!" Hannah snapped her hands, unable to prevent the last knot from being tied. "Stop it, Hannah!" Desmond was determined to ignore her reaction. I am helping you. You don't understand. Hannah pushed herself away, struggling at the bonds at her wrists. You're the one that doesn't understand, she cried. You don't want me seeing Alaric because he loves me. I thought I could trust you. Alaric doesn't love you, Desmond shouted back as he tried to grab her. He's a unicorn. He's going to take you to the elves, and I will not let him do that to you. Get away from me! You don't know anything! Her frantic flailing sent her off balance, sending her to the ground with a painful thud. Desmond gritted his teeth as he watched the panicked girl cry and squirm, her white gown now covered in damp soil. He pulled another coil of rope from his pouch. Hannah grunted, dragging herself, trying to keep away from him. She stopped face down in the grass, sobbing. How can you do this to me? Hannah's breathing was heavy from her struggle. Desmond kneeled, placing his arms around her. She refused to look at him. Listen to me. You are under a powerful spell. You may not know it, but everyone who loves you knows it to be true. You are enchanted. Hannah did not answer, instead continuing to let out loud, shallow moans. I tied your hands so that you would not harm yourself. If you continue to struggle, I will also have to bind your feet. Desmond cringed at his necessary words. You need to get well. You can't do that alone. I can't help you alone either. If anyone can help me break this spell, Gunther can. He touched her cheek, turning her head so their eyes met. You have to trust me, Hannah. I won't hurt you. You know I won't. Just having to do what I'm doing now is killing me. He leaned his face closer to hers, watching fresh tears stream as her eyes recognized his words. I want you back. No unicorn could love you as much as I do. Hannah looked away, closing her eyes until they became painful, tight slits. She squirmed, freeing her still bound hands from the pinned position between their bodies. With shaking fingers, she caressed Desmond's face. This is not who I am. She gulped hard, trying to control the extremes of emotions rampaging through her. Her eyes flashed with a moment of clarity. Desmond buried his face in her neck. For the first time, he broke through the magic, making her see what was indeed happening. But the battle was not over yet. He looked back at her. I'm going to pick you up, okay? He said. I still need to get you back. Then we can break the spell for good. Hannah smiled, nodding. Desmond wiped his damp face on his sleeve. Let's get you out of here, he said, as he helped her to sit up. The brush rustled, the violent movement catching Desmond's attention. A sharp pain seared through his side, enveloping his mind in a bright light. He felt himself move against a great force, Hannah's scream echoing like a distant howl as his back crashed against a tree trunk. Desmond struggled to breathe as he fell to the ground, spitting out leaves and dirt. I told you to leave well enough alone, the voice boomed. Desmond coughed out the blood-tinted mud, struggling to raise his head. Cloudy, disoriented eyes revealed Hannah staggering to her feet, the black unicorn towering over her in a protective posture. Did he hurt you? Alaric asked with sincere concern. Why are your hands tied? Hannah stared at Desmond, still face down on the earth. She looked up at the unicorn, torn between the two suitors. I'm all right. He was just trying to help. The unicorn's head jerked, his face full of suspicion. Help? He snorted. I question that immensely. He turned back to the girl. It is time for me to leave this place. Will you come with me? Hannah gasped at the question. Leave her alone! The voice behind them yelled. Hannah, don't answer that! If you answer, I can't break the spell no matter how much help I have. You know what answer lies in your heart, Alaric continued. If you come with me, I promise I will take care of you. The elves will fight my decision, but I will not let them take you. Hannah started to tremble as she covered her mouth with her still-bound hands. Desmond rose to his feet, finding it hard to stay that way. Everything spun as the pain in his side throbbed through him. Clutching at the wound did little to control it. "I said, leave her alone!" he yelled again, his voice growing hoarse. "She is not leaving with you! Not now, not ever!" Alaric snorted hard, stomping an ivory hoof. "You are much more arrogant than I mistook you for. Not only do you want to make her decision, but you purport to know my will as well? Do you believe you can reverse what has already been chosen?" "With my life," Desmond answered. The black unicorn lowered his head, pawing the ground, and lashed his raven tail. "Then so be it." The stallion rose high on his hind legs, crying a shrill neigh. His muscles trembled as he crashed to the earth, bolting forward with tremendous energy. Desmond jumped out of the way, missing the lethal tip of the unicorn's horn as it tried to find its mark. Alaric spun, thrashing out with more success. The boy hurled away from the stallion's forelegs, one hoof striking his shoulder. In pain and anger, Desmond grasped his hand into the dirt. Grabbing a stone, he swung, hitting hard against Alaric's muzzle. It dug into the sensitive flesh, creating a deep gash, sending blood splashing. The unicorn refused to let the hit go unpunished. Desmond felt another hoof strike his already bruised side, causing him to lose his balance and return to the ground. The unicorn stood menacingly over the fallen, groaning apprentice. Hannah loosened her bonds in the commotion, the rope still dangling from her left wrist. She watched in horror at what was unfolding. Desmond rolled onto his back, a movement at once greeted by a hoof placed on his sore chest. He looked up at the massive body. Alaric stared down, controlling his weight on the hoof, allowing just enough to let the sharp cloven points dig into the boy's skin. "Choose, Hannah," Alaric called impatiently, still pinning Desmond to the ground. "Come with me or stay with your fallen admirer." Desmond gritted his teeth, letting out a loud moan. Wrapping his fingers around the unicorn's fetlock, he tried in vain to push the hoof off. "Don't go with him," he grunted, the only words he managed to get out. Hannah started crying, shaking her head in disbelief. Her attempts at speaking were greeted with silence. Alaric sighed, releasing the boy beneath him. Desmond let out a choking gasp, unable to control the desperate coughing. The unicorn's features transformed into dark calm as he approached the sobbing, flustered girl. "I am so sorry," Alaric said, placing his warm muzzle against Hannah. She reached up, tracing the almost healed gash marring his face. "Come with me. You are much too precious for this mortal world, and much too precious for me to leave behind." The girl leaned over, kissing the unicorn on the forehead. I can't choose," she whispered. "I just can't." Alaric arched his powerful neck, his eyes revealing a hint of sadness. "I understand," he answered, stepping away from her. "On the same token, you must understand the decision I must make now. As we all must do, we must live with the consequences of our decisions, or lack of them." She saw the fire light in the unicorn's eyes, panic bursting through her. "No!" she screamed as Alaric exploded in a frenzy of motion. Desmond couldn't move in his haze. The unicorn reared up, aiming the ivory horn towards him, the massive body hurtling his way like an arrow. A streak of white crossed his eyes as Desmond felt himself shoved back onto the ground, a weight falling on top of him. Stars swirled in his eyes from the impact, his stunned eyes locking on Hannah before him. "Desmond," she gasped as everything went still. At first, he didn't realize what had happened. Hannah continued staring at him, her enchanted eyes full of shock. "Hannah?" he whispered as a trickle of blood made a thin trail from the corner of her mouth. Sinking into his arms, she let out a little whimper. The back of her white gown seeped in red. "No." Alaric backed away, the fire that blinded him replaced with disbelief. The ivory horn that once glowed with pale light was tainted with the dark streaks of blood. "What have you done?" Desmond spoke, the realization of what happened dawning on him. He turned Hannah onto her back, laying her on the ground. She stared upward, but looked at nothing, her breathing a whisper. Desmond placed his shaking hands on her, unsure what to do next. Crimson stains smeared the gown, bringing attention to the blood staining Desmond's hands. He stared up at the startled unicorn. "What have you done?" he repeated louder. The unicorn twitched, his front legs pacing. I didn't expect her to." As the words stuttered out, Alaric kneeled beside Desmond, who refused to let her go. "You have to heal her," Desmond ordered, unable to control his tears. "You're a unicorn. You have healing power, so do it!" Alaric turned away, ashamed. "I cannot." Desmond became enraged, rising to his feet, ignoring his pain. "What do you mean you cannot?" he screamed. "You did this! Undo it! I will kill you if you don't!" Alaric nuzzled the near-lifeless body, cringing at the demand. A unicorn's healing magic is in their horn, but if they strike, fouling it, the magic will not heal whom the blood belongs. His large blue eyes filled with grief. He lowered his head, burying his muzzle in Hannah's red hair. As her fading scent filled his senses, he began to weep. Desmond was taken aback by the mourning creature, never thinking he would see one show what he believed was an exclusive human emotion. "No, she's not dead yet. There has to be something we can do." He searched his mind, trying to remain calm. There's no time to bring her back to the house. She'll be too far gone, if not dead already." He closed his eyes, shaking his head. "The book!" he blurted, his head snapping up. Desmond scurried around, looking for Gunther's worn spell book, the unicorn watching him curiously. Finding it, he went over to Hannah, pushing Alaric away. "When you promised Hannah you would take care of her, was it real?" Alaric's ears pointed forward. "What do you mean by that?" "Your promise! Was it real?" he asked with more determination. "Or was it just another one of your lies to get her to go with you?" "I did not lie to her," Alaric protested, offended. "I meant every word." Desmond opened the book. "Good, because I'm going to give you what you want." The black unicorn stood. "What are you talking about?" The young sorcerer did not raise his head, finding the page he needed. "You are going to keep your promise to Hannah. In turn, you are going to keep your promise to me. If you harm her or betray her in any way, I will spend the rest of my days hunting down your kind until I rid this world of every last one of you." "You have my word," the unicorn nodded, knowing the boy spoke with furious sincerity. "But what are you going to do?" Desmond leaned over Hannah, brushing her hair with his fingers. "Give her what she wants," he replied. "I'm not stupid. I know about your idea of a choice. If Hannah stays with me, the magic will kill her. If she goes with you, she becomes just another elf plaything until they grow tired of her. But if I turn her into a unicorn..." Alaric snapped up. "What? That's insane," he answered. "You do not have the control to cast such a powerful spell. You'll end up destroying her." "And she'll be no better off than she is now," Desmond snarled. Kneeling beside her, Desmond propped the book before him, outstretching his arms and closing his eyes. Placing his hands on her, he started chanting his spell. The unicorn stepped away, allowing the sorcerer to work unencumbered. The words poured without effort into his mind and onto his tongue, the book no longer needing to be there. Desmond felt an overwhelming and indescribable feeling surround him, his ears pounding with the sound of blood rushing through his veins. His eyes were shut so tight they began to make a bright, painful inside light, the magic not letting him go until he finished his task. His hopelessness vanished, his sorrow disappeared, and something inside him burst forth with tremendous energy, causing him to cry out. The words escaped him like a violent rushing wind swirling about him. Then a great thunderclap crashed through his very being, sending him hurtling back to the hard earth. Desmond awoke, realizing he was not at home in his bed, finding himself lying on the grass. His entire body was damp from sweat. Half opening his eyes, he tried to move. Just the thought of doing so made his whole body ache with sharp pain. Shutting his eyes, he tried to return to the dream he awoke from. It was the most peculiar dream. I was a wizard calling on a storm to give birth to a unicorn. I was struck by lightning, but I didn't feel a thing. He listened to the near silence around him. Crickets called to each other as a cool breeze caressed his face. A low, steady breathing came from nearby, a prominent echo in his ears. As his senses came to him, Desmond tried to wake himself up. Disoriented, he raised his head, his eyes struggling to focus on something ahead of him. It was some kind of animal lying in the grass as if in a trance. It was large, yet fragile at the same time. Heavy breaths flared through its nostrils, as if caught up in a dream. A horse. It looks like a horse. Desmond forced himself up, but his body fought any attempt to do so. He looked at the white horse again, its fiery red mane cascading onto the grass. Suddenly, it all started returning in flashes as he looked on, shocked at the scene before him. At the white horse with the red mane, and a delicate spiral horn right above her emerald eyes. The leaves began to turn a blazing red and gold, welcoming the autumn season. The wind sharpened its bite, yet it would still be a while before any winter snow would be seen. Desmond's studies had been progressing quite well, his proficiency in magic impressing even his stubborn teacher, Gunther. It wouldn't be long before he would send his young apprentice away to study under an actual court wizard, though for now there were still plenty of obligations to keep Desmond settled where he was. As he looked for something amid his vast collection, Gunther stood back, watching Desmond reading a passage from the old book of spells with close attention. Instead of struggling with the first half, Desmond was near the end, with frustration no longer an issue. There was a different air about him. He looked more confident about his studies. The young, naive boy was far outgrown, with no more impatient struggles. Ironically, Desmond didn't seem impressed now that he could call his magic up whenever he needed. Now it was just a matter of learning to control it better. He didn't run off as much as he used to either, preferring to stay within the confines of the cluttered house, doing his chores without complaint, unlike in the past. Some days Desmond would go off for hours and then return, not saying a word to his teacher. The wizard shook his head, noting with sadness that the changed attitude was very much related to the young girl's disappearance across the river. Today was one of those days. After much studying, Desmond decided to take his walk. He took a cloak from the rack by the door, leaving through his usual route. He traced through the forest, colorful dry leaves crumbling under his feet. As he neared the river, he came across the now empty cottage that used to be Hannah's home. Distraught with the loss of her youngest, Hannah's mother decided to leave the area and move in with one of her older daughters. Desmond couldn't remember which one it was, but it didn't matter to him. He stood staring at the cottage. The wear of the elements without the benefit of maintenance began to show. Desmond let out a deep sigh, clutching the collar of his cloak. He began to move on when movement inside attracted his attention. He reached the small house, following the path he could not remove from his mind no matter how hard he tried. Entering, he took care not to startle whatever was inside. The dusty wood floor creaked with his every step. At the far end, he could see the shape of a white horse. A unicorn. The unicorn was tiny compared to the black stallion he had grown familiar with. She moved with an unnatural grace except with a certain awkwardness, as if she wasn't used to her slender legs supporting her frame. With silent steps, she looked around the abandoned home, carefully avoiding the scattered pieces of broken furniture that littered the place. "I didn't expect to find you here, Hannah," Desmond said to the unicorn. She did not look at him immediately. Instead, she continued to study the house. "Sometimes I find myself forgetting," she said, her voice soft. "I know it wasn't that long ago that I lived here, but for some reason, details escape me like I'm waking from a dream." She turned to the young man, bewilderment in her eyes. "Sometimes I even forget what I looked like before." "I remember well," Desmond replied as he touched her velvet forehead by the base of the spiral horn. "A beautiful maiden with fire-red hair, blessed by the sun. I would have given anything to be with her." "You flatter me." The unicorn gave out a laugh, something more like a delicate whinny. Desmond smiled. She was still just as he remembered. He caressed her head, noticing the horn did not glow. It was no different than a ram's horn or a deer's antlers. Even though she was born of magic, she had no magic. "So, how is life with your king?" he asked. "Is it everything you had hoped?" Hannah smirked, glancing away. "I guess that is my curse," she said. "You have given me my one wish, yet I find myself not contented." "It can't be that bad. Doesn't Alaric love you as much as you love him?" "Alaric." Her features softened at the mention of the black unicorn's name, a shy smile appearing. "He is wonderful, and he takes care of me. However, it is much harder." She nuzzled Desmond. "I feel so alone sometimes. He is the only one who talks to me. The other unicorns treat me as if I had remained human, violating whatever sanctity they had. I seem to do better with the elves because I'm some kind of novelty to them." Desmond hugged her neck, trying to comfort the unicorn as best he could. They stayed in the house, reliving memories that Hannah struggled to grasp. She would remember for a while, and then it would abandon her like autumn leaves on the wind. Desmond hid his apprehension behind a polite smile. Was her human half fading in favor of her unicorn half, he thought. With no magic of her own, I'm afraid of what that means. He tried not to dwell on the little things, how she forgot certain words or a sudden twitch of the head that was not deliberate. Something was wrong, yet he knew his magic was not powerful enough to fix it. The magic that appeared on the night of the transformation was a powerful fluke. From what Desmond could see, it was not powerful enough. When it started to get dark, Hannah accompanied him home, making sure not to come close enough to risk Gunther seeing her. She was missing her human self, however she loved Alaric too much to leave. Desmond refused to think about it. Just as the initial choice was hers, so must the rest. She had to live with the consequences of those choices. As much as he was worried, he could no longer help her. As the season passed, the white unicorn with the fire-red mane came around less and less. Desmond would look for her sometimes. After a while, he'd return to his work, his heart a little heavier. If she was turning into a full unicorn, she might forget her entire human existence. But a unicorn without magic was just a horse with a horn. She would just be another animal in the forest, and he doubted Alaric could do anything for her then. Hannah would end up alone, and worse, she wouldn't even know it. Snow blanketed the forest with a cover of virgin white, encasing slumbering trees in ice. The sunlight glittered on the smooth surfaces, everything sparkling like crystal. Desmond chopped wood for the fireplace, his feet disappearing in the crunching powder. As he collected the blocks, a familiar sight greeted him. "Hannah," Desmond spoke, his breath visible in the cold air. Hannah did not answer, instead greeting him with a timid smile. Her coat was a brilliant white. She would disappear into her wintry backdrop if it hadn't been for the fiery mane making her stand out. "I'm so glad you came back," Desmond continued, putting down his axe to walk towards her. "I haven't seen you in such a while." He hugged her neck, pleasantly surprised by the visit. Hannah nuzzled him in return. Desmond raised his head, looking at her, unable to hide the trouble waving through him. "I'm surprised you came so close here. Aren't you afraid that Gunther will see you?" Desmond prayed for her to speak. "And what will he do?" the unicorn answered with gentle mocking. "I hardly think he would consider me much of a threat to anyone." Desmond smiled in a feeble attempt to ignore her peculiar speech. "Maybe he'll think you came to steal me away." Hannah let out a laugh. "You know I wouldn't do that to you. I couldn't, even if I wanted anyway." She paused. "I'm not like the other unicorns, you know." Desmond's heart sank at how each word came out as if she were forcing them. "I'm sorry about your magic. I wasn't sure if you realized you didn't have any," he answered. "I wish I could give you something." The unicorn nuzzled him again. "You've done more for me than anyone should ask for. I do not blame you." "Have you asked Alaric to heal you?" "Make me a real unicorn?" Desmond lowered his head. "He cannot make me real, just as you couldn't. Magic doesn't work that way." They spoke for a bit about whatever minor goings were happening to them. Hannah's memory had deteriorated, speech being a hardship for her. Her twitching had also become more noticeable, her head bobbing slightly without stopping. Desmond attempted to lighten the mood. "Hey, I was accepted to join a court wizard in the Upper Kingdom for my final studies. It seems like the word of my talent is spreading." "I'm so happy for you, Desmond," Hannah replied. "I always knew being a wizard was so important to you. You deserve your success. You've certainly earned it." "Makes all that gardening worth the effort, that's for sure." Desmond's smile faded to a weak grin, as he could not avoid Hannah's sad eyes. He reached out and placed his hand on her muzzle. "Hannah, what's wrong?" He nuzzled her forehead, feeling her warmth against his face. "You know you can always talk to me, right? I'm always here for you." Hannah stood silent in the snow, her long winter coat doing little to hide that she had grown stocky since they last saw each other. "I'm pregnant." "You're what?" Desmond stuttered, not believing his ears. "I didn't think that was possible." "Well, it seems I'm close enough to do at least that," Hannah answered, looking away. "Alaric is, of course, the father, if that's your next question." Desmond grimaced sheepishly. Hannah continued, the pain in her whole being hard to overlook. "It's the last straw for many of the unicorns in the valley. One of them, Lilith, can't fathom the thought of the herd being ruled by a questionable heir. She's trying to gain support to drive me out." "That can't be possible," Desmond replied, remembering his solemn vow to the black unicorn. "You have Alaric on your side. He won't let them do that to you." Or would he? Desmond finished without speaking. He didn't want to upset Hannah more than she already was by implying that Alaric would turn on her. "No, Alaric would not allow them to," she said. "I just don't know what can happen any more than he can. He can appease everyone for now." "I never realized being a unicorn would be so complicated," Desmond answered. Hannah wrapped her head and neck around Desmond, doing the closest thing to embracing him as she could. "I miss you so much," Hannah spoke under her breath. "What I would give to turn back what happened. I am so sorry." It was the first time he ever heard her talk about him instead of Alaric, causing Desmond to frown at her words. Whatever spell was holding her to the unicorn was fraying, leaving her in an uncertain situation. Hannah could never return to her human form, but couldn't live as a full unicorn either. And now her being pregnant was bringing up even more questions. Was the spell he used powerful enough to change her so she had unicorn offspring? Or would the herd be passed down to a human ruler? No one had ever heard of anything like this happening before, but no one had ever turned a girl into a unicorn either. Desmond stood holding her. I knew all along how much I loved you, and I let it slip away. None of this would have happened if I told you from the beginning how I felt. I should have never been so afraid. I'm sorry, too, he sadly whispered as it began to snow. Desmond searched the house, making the last preparations for his trip. Traveling to the Upper Kingdom was a long journey, and he didn't want to find out midway that he had forgotten something important. His stomach quivered with a combination of nervousness and excitement. After all the hard work and all the studying, it was all paying off. Desmond was on his way to advance his training, taking his magic to a level he thought he would never reach. Gunther was fussing over him like a mother hen, following his every move, double-checking his belongings, fretting over his clothing. Desmond couldn't help but find the situation humorous. He had never seen his teacher display anything beyond mild amusement. Even then, it would quickly disappear in favor of a harsher emotion. Today, he showed a rare side to him. It was a proud moment for the old wizard whose apprentice would be leaving for a prestigious university, adding to his own reputation as well. They would be holding a grand ceremony to welcome him in. Wild horses could not keep Gunther from being there. They both walked outside, still surprised by the luxurious carriage that waited for them. A coachman was busy settling in their luggage inside a compartment on its roof, while another was double-checking the horse's harness. I still can't believe this is happening, Desmond said to his teacher, who chuckled in reply. Don't be, Gunther answered. I told you from the very beginning that you have what it takes. It's only going to get better from here. You just needed the right motivation. A twinge of melancholy rose in Desmond's chest as he watched Gunther give the coachman one more bag. Gunther couldn't even fathom what Desmond had to go through to get that motivation or realize its price. Well, are you just going to stand there? It's time to go! Gunther's waving snapped Desmond out of his thoughts. Satisfied they had gotten everything, the young man turned, locking the door to the cottage. It would be a long while before he saw this place again, if at all. Desmond grabbed the carriage door. Pausing, he looked in the direction past the house towards the river. Hannah had stopped coming around after their last meeting. Several attempts at finding her yielded no clues as to the unicorn's whereabouts. With him leaving, seeing her one last time would be impossible. The realization made him let out a heavy sigh. You take care of her and her baby, Alaric, Desmond spoke under his breath so no one would hear. And you take care of yourself, Hannah. I hope you're okay. Climbing into the carriage with his excited teacher, Desmond looked out the window, mixed emotions welling inside. With a sudden lurch, the carriage moved forward. He watched the cottage that had been his home for the past several years disappear as they started their journey to new lives of their own. It was time to stop thinking about unicorns. Thank you so much for listening to EGORAVEN, Legend of the Silk Rose, created and written by Daphne Lage, narrated by Daphne Lage. Visit my website at egoworks.com, www.egoworks.com.